Hello, everyone. This is Neil Muckler down in the San Diego chapter, and welcome to another Thursday night with CREIA, our COVID safe presentations. Well, tonight, down in San Diego, we've got just some jewels of associates and people that have really kept our members so well educated. And one of the true jewels we have in San Diego chapter is our presenter tonight, Rick English. He is, I can't even remember a time when you weren't there, Rick, always helping
Right.
out, giving all kinds of toolboxes and talks at the meeting nights. And I know my pool inspections are much, much better every time I hear what you have to say. So tonight, everybody, enjoy really one of the great pool inspectors there are in the world, sincerely. Rick, it's all up to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. The Obviously, my name is Rick English. CBP stands for Certified Building Professional. That's awarded by our trade organization. I also teach the course for people that want to take that test. CPO stands for Certified Pool Operator. That's another course that I teach. That's for pool maintenance only. My website is poolinspections.com or swimmingpoolexpert.com. They both take you to the same place. I got in the pool industry in 1977, and from 1977 to 1998, I built between 1,500 and 2,000 pools. At that point, I was starting to get a lot of work from attorneys as an expert witness, so I sold the construction business to my partner. My old business is still in business today. They've gone through a few changes, but for the past 22 years, I've been doing nothing but inspections, expert witness work, teaching classes, and that sort of thing. My motto is, I'll do anything around a pool except work. So, I've been an active member of CREIA, an affiliate, since 1998. Even before then, I was giving seminars to CREIA about pool inspections. And obviously, things have changed tremendously over the past 20 years, especially. So let's get on. Let's see if we can get things to move. I'm going to cover safety items first because I know that was a concern for a lot of people. We're going to talk about fencing, especially. We're going to talk about electrical, Article 680 in the National Electric Code. That's our own special article. And bonding, which is confusing to a lot of people. We'll talk about drains, diving boards, and slides. And we'll try to move on from there. I tried to shuffle these slides a little bit to cover these items first, but we'll see how that works out. I did put a PDF of my PowerPoint up a couple days ago, but I tweaked it a little bit today. And if you want me to resubmit that or post it somewhere, I'll be happy to do so. First, we'll talk about fencing. When I was first in the business, before 1996, then all we had to have was a 5-foot high fence that protected the pool from the neighbors. A pool was considered an attractive nuisance, and so you had to have a fence that would keep anybody who wasn't on your property from getting on your property. It had to be 5 foot high with no openings greater than 4 inches. It could not be ladder-like. The gates have to swing out away from the pool, self-close and self-latch. Clearance under the fence would be 2 inches if it's above concrete or a wall, 4 inches if it's above soil. And I got that just backwards on the slide here. The 5-foot barrier is designed to keep out the neighbors. Now, some states have different requirements. I teach this seminar on a national basis sometimes, so we'll get in some states where they'll say, well, we only have to have 4-foot fences, and we'll get some places where they have to have 6-foot fences. So always check your local codes, because we have a state code, which is pretty much what I'm giving you, but then every little city, county that has a building department can change that code if they want to. They can't make it easier, but they can make it stricter. Here's some of the rules about fencing. If you have a A rail fence like this, the maximum space between them, the boards is 1 5/8 inches, 1 3/4 inches for chain link fences, and once again your 4-inch spacing on a picket fence, and your rails have to be more than 45 inches apart. So again, here's the clearance to dirt, 2 inches, clearance to concrete, 4 inches. I guess the idea is that if you're over dirt, it'd be a little hard to dig under it if it's only 2 inches above the ground. But I didn't write these rules, so but there's a lot of people that can get involved in them, including my trade organization. They have written a recommendation for fencing, but the national recommendation is only 4 foot. So after 1997 and the Swimming Pool Act of 2007 in California, we had to have one of the following: an intermediate fence, an approved set of alarms, all pool accessible doors, self-closing and self-latching. And by the way, you can buy a pretty reasonably priced self-latcher for sliding glass doors these days. That used to be really expensive. They're only about $200 now. And that's because of our friends in Arizona. An approved automatic pool cover, and I'll talk about what that means in a little bit here. And the exception, now this is an exception in San Diego County only, but it pretty much goes for the rest of the state as well. If the lot is greater than 3 acres and the pool is at least 100 foot from any property line, then the primary fence, the one we described earlier, the 5 foot high fence, you don't have to have it, but you still have to have the intermediate fence, okay? That makes things really confusing. So here's intermediate fencing. I took this picture on an inspection one day, and as you can see, we have an intermediate fence, and we have an intermediate fence that did not self-close and self-latch, and it swung in toward the pool, which is a problem in itself. And the buyer was talking to the home inspector. Frequently, I'm on the job the same time the home inspector is. And I tapped the buyer on the shoulder, and I pointed to the fence. And she freaked out, as you can well imagine. Look at this. I mean, this picture is worth 1,000 words. I put it on Facebook, and I must have got 200 comments. So the intermediate fence has to follow all the rules of the primary fence. Self-close and self-latch, 5 foot high. The removable mesh fences has to meet an ASTM standard. One of the big things about the removable mesh fence is it only has to be 4 foot high, but a gated hinge is recommended. And this is what you're going to see when you get out there. The guys that sell these fences, they want to be low bidder. So they have 2 tricks that they pull. They tell them not to put gates in because they're not absolutely required. They say all you have to do is take the piece down, use the pool, put the piece back up. And if any of you who have ever tried to take one of these pieces down and put it back up, you'll know that that's bogus. It's not easy at all. And sometimes I've spent 20 minutes trying to get one of those to hook in correctly. So what happens is the people that don't have gates tend to take sections of fake fences down and leave them down. I've gone on inspections where I see 3 sections of fence just laying on the ground. Well, I guess their kids can't drown that morning. They've somehow become waterproof until the fence goes back up. So a hinge gate is recommended, but what the salespeople do is they try to talk them out of the fence because the fence adds another $400 or so to the price. The gate has to swing out, self-close and self-latch, just like a regular fence. And there must be a clear zone of at least 20 inches between the fence and the pool. Now, that's the Consumer Product Safety Commission's recommendations, the ASTM specifications. I think that is absurd. I think they should be at least 5 foot, maybe 4 foot from the pool, because you are going to end up taking sections of the fence down if it's only 20 inches away. And yet I'll see salespeople sell them right in, drill them right into the coping. They figure if they get that footage down, they'll be low bidder and they'll get the job. And I'm sure all of you at some point in your time in your life have had to bid against low bidders who will pull any trick in the book to get the job. And I think it's pathetic when you're selling a safety item to do that. The other thing is it has to have enough opening space that you can see through it. Now, any material that you buy that's certified is going to meet this classification, but it's the other things that I just mentioned that the installer has control over. And remember that most of the times these are going to be put in with no building inspection, especially if they're retrofitted. If they're put in before the inspector leaves, and you get an inspector that has taken this seminar, which very few of them have, then they might catch them on some of this stuff. Now, the interesting thing is the fence only has to be 48 foot high, but the latch has to be 54 inches high. And that's pretty much standard for all fences. The latches have to be 54 inches high. And so here we see an example of one called a Magna latch. It's a very good latch, and it sticks up above the fence because the latch is 54 inches high. So a kid can't just reach up to the top of the fence and open it. They have to be able to reach 54 inches. Now, we can also have door alarms that look like this. The most important thing to look for is the word pool on the alarm itself. They have to have a certain decibel rating. It has to sound continuously for 30 seconds. You have to hear it throughout the whole house. It must automatically reset. And if they buy a burglar alarm, I always tell my clients, you go to Home Depot, you see a door alarm that costs 20 bucks, and right next to it, you see another one that costs $75. The one you want is the one that costs 75 bucks. And if it has the word pool on it, that's the one I have here is Pool Guard. There's another one called the Pool Sentry. It's virtually identical. And people put them up and they hold them up with double sticky tape or Velcro. And a lot of people will then take the batteries out of them. Believe it or not, they're supposed to be battery operated because we want them to work even when there's a power outage. And again, the deactivation switch, that little button that you see for turning off the alarm has to be 54 inches high. So that 54 inches is kind of a magic number when it comes to fencing. Now, there are alarms that you can put in the pool. These are viable. Now, what's happened is in 2018, the law changed again to say that now in a new pool, you had to have 2 intermediate barriers, and there's 7 possible ones. Now, I've listed so far the intermediate fence, the removable mesh fence, the door alarms. Swimming pool alarms are another one of the options. And automatic pool covers are another one. And then there's a bunch of really esoteric ones that we probably won't spend much time talking about. But pool alarms that are installed at the pool or in the pool have to meet certain standards. And most of the times they don't. They tend to be too sensitive or not sensitive enough. The ones that work the best are usually submerged, okay? And if they're submerged, they're usually battery operated, and there has to be a low battery warning condition in the house. There's some really nice ones that are sonar operated. I've got a few pictures of them for you. But let's look at the 4 different kinds of pool alarms. Surface alarms that float, okay? They shouldn't alarm when you drop a basketball in the water from a height of 6 inches above the water at a distance of 36 inches from the alarm. The alarm must not alarm during a simulated wind test. You're not going to do these tests. These tests should be done in a lab and should indicate that this has happened. Perimeter alarms are similar, are done with like lasers, and we put a laser perimeter around a pool, and if somebody steps through it, the alarm goes off. And again, they must not alarm when a metal sheet that small goes through it. It has to be something big enough, and it should be wind protected. Now we get into the subsurface alarms. These are sonar, and they sound during a child intrusion simulation test. Again, this is not something that I would do or you would do. This is something that would be printed on the alarm itself. It must not alarm when the basketball's dropped in. We talked about that before. It must not alarm during a wind test, okay? And then lastly, we have one called, go back, Rick. Last one we have is what's called a personal immersion alarm. And this is a wristwatch that the kids wear. Usually it's called the pool turtle is the name that I'm familiar with. And this is a wristwatch that a kid wears. And when the kid falls in the pool, the alarm goes off. Not allowed, not acceptable. I mean, you could buy them. It might be another additional layer of protection, but not one that we can pass as code. Your job as a home inspector is to indicate whether any of these exist. That's all you have to say. Do they exist? You don't have to say that they meet the standards. And what I would advise home inspectors to do when you see everything from a fence to a removable mesh fence is recommend that they have somebody else take a look at them. It can get pretty tricky. But a lot of times you're going to see a fence that's say too high above the ground, a chain link fence that is wide open, that has real wide openings in it, a fence made out of wire with 4-inch openings, that sort of thing. You can call that out. Door latches, gates that don't latch, wood gates always sag. If you find a wood gate that's more than 2 or 3 years old that self-closes and self-latches, I'd be amazed. The things just sag, and then they put the cheap latches on them, and they don't latch. So they almost always need some type of repair. And when I open them, I don't open them all the way. I open them just a couple inches and see if they close. If you open them all the way, then you got a better chance that the spring's going to work. Okay, so here's a couple of sonar alarms. These are obviously mounted off the pool, but you can see that they're designed to be anchored permanently. There's another one, and I lost my picture of it, that you take up the coping being these bricks here, and you set down the alarm and then reset the coping, and the alarm hangs down in the pool about 18 inches. And these things have a pretty good reputation. Now, when you're building a new pool, you can build sonar right into it. And there's some really nice, expensive systems that let people do that. Now, automatic pool covers. Now, these never pass inspection. Automatic pool covers, they have to follow a ASTM standard. Now, here's one of the first things to look at, and this drives me nuts. The operator has to have a clear view of the entire pool. Now, the standard doesn't say whether that means the entire pool surface or the entire pool floor. I try to interpret it as the floor. Now, the idea behind that is you don't want somebody closing the cover if someone's under the water. So you have to be able to see them. And so in this pool, if I'm down here, looking at it from the perspective of this picture, somebody could be down under the water at the end of the pool while I'm closing it. So, but the standard does not say the floor. It just says have view of the pool. So all you can do is give them your best counsel. The other thing is that this switch has to be 5 foot high. Why it's not 54 inches, I don't know. 5 foot high, or be key operated. Now, these switches are momentary. You turn the switch, you have to hold it while the cover moves. Let go of the switch and the motion stops. But you're supposed to take the key out, right? Now, you see how that key comes out, but what do you see when you go on the job? People leave the key in them all the time. And so I call them out on that. Don't leave the key, either raise it up so that it's 5 foot high, and or take the key out. And there are some now that have a code that you can punch in, which I think is a better option because you don't tell the kids the code, hopefully, and the adults have to know the code when they put it in. Now you'll notice down below the key, you'll see that there's a warning that says a responsible adult shall be in charge and a few other things. Those warnings are required to be by the switch. So if you see some of the newer switches that don't have those warnings there, that's something to call out. Now here's something that there's some other rules too. When it closes, you can't have any openings greater than 4 inches. But when you cover the pool, you're supposed to take a gadget that looks like this, and there's a couple other designs called a cover pump. And the cover pump is attached to a garden hose, and it's plugged in, and you toss it out on the cover, and it creates a low spot because it's not real heavy, but it's heavier than the cover. It creates a low spot, and then when it rains, all the water goes to that low spot. The pump comes on and pumps the water off the top of the pool. Well, every cover that's installed in California gets a cover pump. Trust me, they get the cover pump. But then it goes in the garage and people never take it out because it doesn't rain that much. Um, a while back, I had a call from a client in La Jolla that said, Rick, you can't come out and inspect the pool today. And I said, why not? They said, well, it rained last night and we can't get the cover to open. I said, well, let me come out and take a look. No charge if I can't do the inspection. So I went out, walked in the garage, picked up the cover pump, threw it on the pool, pumped it off. And they stood there with their jaws wide open. Where'd you get that thing? Out of your garage. You've had it all these years. You didn't even know you had it. So that's the place to look for the cover pump if you don't see it on the job, or you just tell them to get one. Okay. The covers last 3 to 5 years. I do walk on them. They're supposed to hold, I think, 450 pounds. I do walk on them, but I walk on them after I inspect seams very carefully. I've never torn a cover, but I'm knocking on wood. Maybe that'll happen someday. But then after I walk on the cover and I feel comfortable, I tell people, I say, well, I don't weigh 450 pounds, so I need a couple more people to come out here. And only once in all the years I've been doing this has somebody else come out there. So it's kind of fun. They need annual service. They get tweaked. They're glorified Venetian blinds. They're just pulled out and pulled back with ropes. There's one motor, a bunch of pulleys, and those ropes stretch. Now, some of the newer ones are using electric cables. The newer ones are so much better. They, instead of hanging from underneath the coping, they actually can install the tracks right in the tile, so that when you open the cover, there's hardly any evidence that the cover existed. And there are even some that can handle non-rectangular pools. Okay, check the box for drainage. The box is which is back here, is supposed to drain. And so here we see some of the different manufacturers. See, here we see one, it's right off the ground. There's no warnings on it, and the key is left in it, okay? So here we see a typical cover. Here are some of the manufacturers. The manufacturers are very responsible, but the installers, and then when homes change hands, some of these things, some of the original motivation for having the cover changes, and some of the rules don't get followed. Okay, so it's ASTM F1346-91 for the automatic pool covers. This is a pool filter, and this is my client, Mr. Alcala, in Tucson, Arizona. Mr. Alcala was cleaning a pool filter. He's a pool service guy, or was. And when he finished servicing the filter, he put it back together and he turned on the pump. And the filter was not put together properly. Either he didn't get this clamped down correctly, or he left the air relief valve open or closed. So that meant that the air pressure built up inside the filter, and the lid came off and hit him in the head. He had $250,000 worth of reconstructive surgery. Manufacturers have literally had hundreds of lawsuits about exploding filters, and they usually settle them. So they pulled a really clever trick. And I'm talking about filters that have a clamp around them, like this one. And I just happen to have a picture of a Pentair filter, but this happens with every other brand of filter as well. But Pentair is popular around here, so I get a lot of pictures of Pentair filters. Now you'll notice that the Pentair filter has warnings right on the clamp. It has 500 words of warnings on the filter saying, don't get your head. They have a little diagram on there saying, here's what happens if you hit your head. But then the sneaky thing they did is they went into the filter installation manual. And they did this, Hayward did this, Zodiac did this, Waterway did this, all the manufacturers did this. They didn't all do it on page 1, but Pentair did it on page 1. On page 1, it says that the filter, to be for safety purposes, the filter should be 5 feet away from any switch that can turn on the pump. That way, if things are not done correctly and they turn on the pump and the filter explodes, it's less likely to hit the guy in the head or the gal. Well, when I got the pool business and plumbing, a filter was 1 pipe in and 1 pipe out, sometimes a 3rd pipe for backwash. Today, it's still 1 pipe in, 1 pipe out. Cartridge filters don't even have the backwash pipe. And 20 years from now, it'll be 1 pipe in, 1 pipe out. So for a pool installer to read the installation manual for a filter would be like you or I reading the installation manual for a light bulb. Because I'm sure there's one that says, call the utility company out and turn the service off to your house, get a ladder, wear rubber gloves, and all that sort of thing to change the light bulb. And of course, none of us have ever read that. But if you look here, the latest thing has been to install variable speed pumps. And in service mode, this is the only way you can turn the pump on. You have to open the back of the pump and push this button. And of course, you're right next to the filter. Or you turn it on at the panel, which is right in front of the filter. So I write this up on almost every pool I inspect. There's only 1 or 2 filters that don't qualify, that don't have this type of warning. And if you look at this fella sued Pentair. I was his expert witness, and he lost his lawsuit against Pentair. So, and I had worked about 6 cases like this beforehand, but I always worked defense, and I always said, hey, the guy made a mistake, and it always was true. The guy made a mistake. But then again, every car accident, some guy makes a mistake. Anyway, a word to the warning about filters. Diving boards. Standards for diving boards were set in APSP, which is now PHTA, and a successful lawsuit challenged the standards. The NSPI was bankrupted. So I would recommend that you remove the board or have the manufacturer come out and certify the board, because there's a lot of restrictions. You have to have a lot of information printed on that board. For example, it has to have the manufacturer's name and address. It has to have the maximum weight of the person. It has to have a description of how the pool is supposed to be excavated. None of that's on the diving board. I inspected like a 3-year-old board installed by a very well-known and highly respected pool company just a couple years ago. And it didn't have any of that information on it. I told the guy that was buying the house, I said, you either get the builder or the manufacturer back out here to certify the board or take it off. He called the builder, and the builder said, hell no, we're not coming out. And so they didn't. And he's going to probably take out the board. Breaks my heart, because the only way I ever went in my pool was from the diving board. And my kids would just love the diving board. We had scout meetings, and there was somebody on the board all the time. But when I turned that house into a rental, first thing I did was went out there with my Sawzall and cut off the diving board and put it in storage while my tenant sat there sobbing. But that's our legal system, and we have to deal with it. So the best bet is just recommend they remove the board, and if they want to keep it, let them thing. And by the way, the overhang, sometimes these things don't overhang enough. Sometimes they overhang way too much. So it's usually specified at 18 inches. Slides. Slides are measured from the ground to the top of the handrail. So a 7-foot slide would be 7 foot to the top of that handrail. Most slides today are 7 foot. Slide stands have to be electrically bonded. Now, I'm going to get into bonding later on, but just to tell you, anything within any metal within 5 feet of the pool has to be electrically connected to the pool steel, and we'll get into that a little bit here. But when I go out and I see a slide with these escutcheons, down at the bottom of the post, I know that that slide was added after the pool was finished, because when you put the slide in when the pool is new, you put them in before the deck goes in, and the deck guy pours decking around them. And the slide posts sit in an anchor that's under the concrete or in the concrete, and it has a bonding clamp on it. So they're anchored to a bonding clamp, so you can remove the slide and put it back in next year and still have the approved a bonding connection. So when I see the escutcheon here, I immediately figure that it's not bonded. But that's a different, not the only issue with slides. Minimum depth of water, not that big. 4 foot deep is plenty for a slide. Minimum width at entry right here, 14 inches, or minimum width of the pool is 14 feet from the end of the slide to the other side of the pool. Actually, it's 13 and a half, but I figure that the slide overhangs a little bit. Now, in 1976, the Consumer Product Safety Commission wrote a standard for evaluating slides. And all the manufacturers who make slides, and they make some awesome slides today, not just something that looks like this. They make some really nice slides today, and they all comply with those standards. But what we see today, and I'm sure you've all seen them, are field-built slides. They look like this. Now, one thing that the standard says is that the steps have to be uniform. Well, gee, how about that? It says you have to have a place to put your hands when you go down the slide. Well, gee, that looks cool. And it's supposed to be no more than 1 foot above the water level when you exit the slide. Well, I think we're losing on a few counts there. There have to be handrails at the top. There have to be a handrail on the side of the ladder. None of those things are here. Look at these steps. These are the steps that go up to the slide. I mean, they're cool. They really look neat, but they don't comply with the standard. And I've had some really interesting litigation lawsuits with these things. So here we have no handrail, and then the slides themselves, the finish can be too rough on them. Almost all these field-built slides need to be refinished every couple years. The manufacturers, the builders go down to Home Depot and buy some type of concrete paint and slather a couple coats on top of the gun. Sand it down a little bit. There's some really good finishes, but most of them don't last more than 4 or 5 years. But the same standard has to apply to a field-built slide. So here we have a finish that's delaminating. Here's another set of steps that's going up that doesn't quite meet the standards that are out there today. I got a few more of them. In fact, I've got a lot more than that. So,
Rick, could we take
yes.
a couple of questions?
Sure, take a few questions.
All right. Well, one of the questions I know you can't answer is the NHIE exam. Are there any pool questions on there? And a couple of members have written in saying no, so we don't have to worry about that with the NHIE exam. And
I
then,
haven't taken that one. Go
and
ahead.
then one of the members listening wanted to know if you do ride-alongs.
I did ride-alongs. I was trying to help a gal that was a former student of mine from another life, and because she wanted to get into inspections because she'd been injured and she couldn't lift more than 25 pounds, and she had a service background. And it kind of backfired on me because she went on 3 or 4 inspections with me, and then for financial reasons, she just had to start going out doing inspections. But she was telling everybody that I trained her, and that came back to bite me. Several realtors called me up and said, we relied on the fact that you trained her, and she missed this, and that we got in all kinds of trouble because she said something bad about electrical, and we had to get electricians out there, and she was wrong. So the short answer to the question is no, I do not do ride-alongs. If you're with me, you're doing a home inspection and I'm doing a pool inspection, I'll be happy to tell you exactly what I'm doing every step of the way.
Yeah, I've
But
had
as
that
far as,
happen with you. Yes.
yeah, yeah,
All right.
I know you know who I'm talking about, Neil, but
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
but
This is a little bit of a complex question. We all
right,
know about the 7 safety features that must be
right.
present with the pool or spa vessels, and
That's only that. By the way, that's only on pools built after 2018. Um,
okay.
but you have to tell you as inspectors have to tell them about the 7, um, or say whether they have the 7. You don't have to go into a detailed explanation of all 7 of them. You just have to say 2018 requires 7 barriers for new pools, and you have to, and here's what some of them are. There's fences, doors, and blah, blah, blah. But you don't have to go into the detail that I go into. I do go into more detail. But even so, at the end of my reports, what I say is to comply with the 1997 code, if applicable, you need one of these barriers. To comply with the 2018 code, if applicable, you need 2 of these barriers. I don't tell them they have to have them if they don't have to have them, but I always tell them that I recommend them.
So to finish the question, an example that the member wrote in about was, you have 2 separate French doors and they both have self-closing mechanisms on them. You have a garage side door, it's got a self-closing mechanism on them. So that's just one protection. So
That's
they would
one of the
have to,
7. That's one of the 7, yes.
yes. So they would
And they
have
have
to
to swing
add
out too. They have to swing out away
the
from the pool.
garage door and the French doors.
Yeah, they have to swing away from the pool.
Oh, how nice. Okay. Very
Yeah.
rarely see that. So you'd have to bring in another safety device, uh, and could it be to the doors? So let's say you have self-closing doors, but you add an alarm to them. Does that
Yeah,
make it 2 different?
yeah, that does. That gives you 2.
Great. Rick, you're welcome to keep on.
Keep on keeping on, okay? Uh, okay. Ah, I'm stuffed. Today was my grandson's 10th birthday, and we had the most awesome cake. I'm really feeling the benefits of that sugar right now, so I'm kind of hyped up. Anyway, let's look at the NEC electrical requirements for pools. Okay, and this slide is a little bit out of date. This number that says 10 foot should say 6 foot, but let's get into that. All receptacles within 20 feet of the pool have to be on a GFCI. And I think that's kind of redundant because pretty much almost all the outdoor receptacles have to be on a GFCI anyway. And by the way, since the 2017, I think it was the 2017 electric code, swimming pool pumps have to be on a GFCI as well. So all receptacles have to be GFCI protected. It says no receptacles are permitted less than 5 feet from the inside walls of the pool. However, right now, you might not have any receptacle within 6 feet of the pool, but you must have one within 20 feet of the pool. Now, there are exceptions that you will never run into. It says a receptacle for the cord of a water recirculating pump may be installed close to a pool. And you say, well, when would you have a cord for a pump? Well, that is for above ground pools, and probably you guys aren't running into a lot of above ground pools. So a lot of above ground pools, they don't have self-priming pumps. So they put the pump right next to the pool and they plug it in right next to the pool. But it has to be a locking type plug. And you've all seen the plugs where you have to plug them in, twist them 90 degrees before they actually connect. So pretty much anything within 6 feet of the pool, no electrical conduits under the decks, any of that. But you don't get to see that anyway. Um, The receptacle for the pump must be locking and grounding, and it must also be a GFCI. At least one receptacle in the 6-foot to 20-foot band. Right? So there has to be one out there somewhere. Usually that's not a problem unless the pool is really far away from the house. The idea is they don't want people to get extension cords and be dropping appliances into the pool if they're too far away. These are some of the more confusing slides about where you can have outlets and where you can't have outlets, particularly when you're close to a house. You can have lights in the space above the pool as long as they are at least 12 foot above water, and they should be GFCI protected as well. And here we have our outlets, and again, this number should be 6 feet. And up in this area up here, which is greater than 5 feet high, and greater than 5 feet away from the pool, you can have lights and outlets that are not GFCI protected, although probably other codes have overridden that by now. Another interesting one I run into is electrical conduits have to be safe from impact, which means that if somebody bumps into them, they're not supposed to break. So when you see something like this around the pool equipment, and they should have a stake, usually one of those metal fence stakes works just fine. Sometimes they just take a piece of EMT and drive it in the ground, but then they rust out a couple of years later and you don't have the protection. But here you have switches and other conduits that are not protected. If some kid runs into them with a football, well, who knows what's going to happen. Breakers, 220 breakers have to be tied. I don't have to tell you guys that. Remember that I give this to pool guys too, and they might not know about as much about electrical as you guys do. Here's one I saw right next to a pool. It was live, right next to the pool, within 5 feet, by the way, next to the house. Wires overhead have to be a certain height, and I'm going to get into that in a minute. Here we see some irrigation pipe used as electrical conduit, which is sort of a no-no. We see damaged conduit. I see all kinds of stuff. Here we see a GFCI where the guy pulled out the plug and left the prong back in. There's supposed to be a safety cover over the timer. And of course, this doesn't look quite right, does it? But we also have Romex. So a lot of cool things can happen with electrical. But let's talk a little bit about lights and some of the things to look out for with lights. Okay, this is what a pool light looks like going inside. And some of you are going to tell me, and rightly so, that the world of pool lights is changing, has changed radically. But let's look at the standard pool light because there's still over 1 million pools in California with these lights, right? And so up until 1981, the conduit coming out of this can had to be brass or copper. And even in 1981, the electric code had changed, but they didn't specify, didn't give us enough materials that we could legally do that we could legally switch to PVC. Why did we want to switch to PVC? Because the guniters would kink the metal, the brass conduit, and it became really tough to pull the lights. I literally spent a whole day pulling the lights on my pool because the guniters, who were my friends, had kinked the conduits, but I got the light in. And I heard one electrician tell me, he says, "Oh, it's real easy, Rick." He said, you just peel off the insulation that goes around the wires, pull it through, and then slide a little bit of insulation into the junction box so it looks like it's insulated all the way through. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And that was the last time he did any work for me. But there's a bonding wire inside the conduit. And when we switch to a electric non-metallic conduit, which everybody has done since about maybe late 80s, then there's a bonding clamp in there. They attach a number 8 green wire to it, and that number 8 green wire is stranded. has to be coated wire. It has to have a green coating on it, and it has to be covered. This clamp has to be covered with a potting compound so that water can never get to that connection. On the outside of the can is another bonding connection which goes to the pool steel. Okay, and the can itself is a conductor. When Hayward first introduced non-metallic light cans in the early mid to middle 90s, they literally had to put enough metal in the plastic so that the light can could conduct electricity. This retaining screw up here, there's a electrician that works on the National Electric Code for the swimming pool industry, and he gives lectures. He's a registered electrical engineer. He lives in Pflugerville, Texas. He's quite a character. And he says that this retaining screw is the most important electrical connection on your property. And so there's a lot of times when they have replaced this screw because this has become, the threading has been lost. And there's a good way to do that, and there's a bad way to do that. And of course, there's no way you can tell. And there's no way I can tell. I don't take these lights out when I inspect them, but it's something just to keep in the back of your head. So this extra wire and the light wire goes through the conduit to the junction box, okay? And the junction box has to be at least 4 foot away from the pool. It has to be 8 inches above the maximum water level or 4 inches above the deck, whichever's higher. So what'll fool you sometimes is you see a junction box and it looks like it's higher than it needs to be. But the reason for that is on the other side of the pool is a raised spa. So the maximum water level, because both lights are connected to the same junction box, the maximum water level is going to be the spillway on that spa. So it has to be 8 inches higher than that. And sometimes I find out that that hasn't worked. And if I see it's too low, I open it up and see if there's any signs of water intrusion inside the box, which is exactly what that height is supposed to prevent from happening. So here is your standard junction box, very popular. You guys have probably seen a lot of these. And in here we have grounding terminals, and here we have a pressure connector. That big fat green wire that's coming up from the pool light gets attached to the pressure connector. You can't attach 2 lights to the pressure connector. Now, I know you're going to open these boxes up and you'll see that the guys have created a very nice looking, professional looking Band-Aid where they connect 2 of these wires to the pressure connector. That's a no-no. This is the grounding wires. So this junction box can only be used for 2 lights when you have brass conduit and you're not using that pressure connector, okay? Or you're using it as a grounding terminal. So it's tricky. If you look at one of these boxes and you see 3 PVC pipes going into it, I guarantee you that it's well, I don't guarantee you, but there's a high probability that this is not wired correctly. And this is something that's a little bit too sophisticated for building inspectors to understand. But there are good junction boxes on the market that can handle many, many lights. Intermatic makes a terrific one. Thermocraft makes a terrific one. Pentair even makes a better one. And of course, all lights have to be GFCI protected. Here is an Intermatic, and you can connect several lights to it. Again, 8 inches above water level, 4 inches from the pool, safe from impact. Ground wires must be affixed to a separate terminal. 4 terminals in most junction boxes, 5 terminal boxes are available. The ground wire, okay, now, the wire that comes into this box is coming from the panel. Between the panel and the box, that ground wire cannot be cut. So if it goes into a box and it has to be anchored to that box, you have to peel the insulation off it and anchor it down to the box, but you can't cut it and put a wire nut on it. Here is a junction box that we can use for, I think, up to 3 lights, the thermocraft junction box. Now, flush deck junction box, the wires come up to this box, it's flush with the deck. So as you can see, when the pool fills up with water, this junction box is flooded with water. Now, these were banned in the 1971 electric code, but there's still lots of them out there. In fact, if you could see my office, I could show you that I have a collection of lids from these junction boxes mounted on a piece of old wood on the wall of my office. I collect them, and I have remodeling contractors give them to me. And I get scared when they don't give them to me, because that means they haven't done any old pools. They were outlawed in '71 on lights greater than 16 volts, which they all were, even the LEDs that are about today. So they want you to fill this with approved potting compound, but what I tell people is to jackhammer out the deck and extend this conduit to a regular junction box 4 foot away. You still can't use the thing. And of course, these will never have a GFCI. They'll be pretty old. Here's what they look like. This is a paddock one. In fact, I think I have this one hanging on the wall of my office. This is what they look like. You'll see them out there. Odds are when you put your screwdriver on them, that screw is just going to fracture and you won't be able to get it off. So try it and just be careful. You probably can't do any damage that it hasn't already had. You can see one of the screws is missing, and these guys are really old. Remember, these were banned in '71. Of course, that meant people were still probably using them till about '74. But here's what happens. You take the lid off, and we see that inside this box is nothing but wires and wire nuts. The purpose of the junction box is to connect your underwater protected wiring to regular house wiring. That's where you make that conversion. And so this is what happens with those junction boxes. So you can see there's a very good reason. I don't know how comfortable you would be swimming in a light with a junction box like this, but I wouldn't be too comfortable. And so I was amazed once I was on vacation and I was at this hotel, and I went out and I was at the deck and I saw this junction box. And this hotel was just like 2, 3 years old. And this was just like 4 or 5 years ago this happened. I went, wait a minute, something's wrong here. So I got my screwdriver. Now, don't comment about guys that take screwdrivers on vacations. I don't want to hear it. I got my screwdriver and took the lid off this junction box. And not only it had wire nuts in there, but it had electrical tape in there. And we all know how good that's going to be, right? So how did this get past inspection? And why is a company like Hayward, you can see their logo on there, still making these things? Why do they still make them? They know they're dangerous as all get out. And I don't have the answers to this question. The only reason I know that they got away with it is that the pool was in Costa Rica. It wasn't in the US. So when you get in other countries and you start looking around at getting in the swimming pools, check the light switches first and maybe decide you're not going to swim in that pool at nighttime. Here's one from a magazine that I get called the Service Industry News. As this guy hooked up his underground light in his pool. I actually had one that was worse than this, but I didn't have a digital camera at the time, and where they actually chiseled out the plaster and ran the wire down the side of the pool. But this is a beauty. So here's one where I opened up the junction box. I didn't see the green wire, so I drained the spa down into the pool and inspected the box. This is one of the few times in my career that I've actually opened the box. And there was the bonding clamp, and no wire was connected to it. How they got away with it, I don't know. Now, we're not supposed to have loose connections. Sometimes you'll see this sort of thing out there. Sometimes we see junction boxes that are buried. The switch is supposed to be 5 foot away from the pool, just like anything else. But here's a light. Now, so this one, I unscrewed the light switch, and you see this, you can see this conduit coming up here. That's your underground conduit. That's supposed to go to a junction box. The junction box is then supposed to go to the switch and the GFCI, right? So instead we have a junction box that's about 1.5 feet above water and no GFCI protection. Pretty nasty. Okay, here's a fellow that he put his junction box too low. So to solve the problem, he plastered over the opening in the spa. And sooner or later, that started to leak, and so there was a short in the junction box, and luckily nobody was hurt. So here is your pressure bonding connector, and here is your number. See that big fat wire connected to it? And here we see the regular ground wires connected to the other connections, okay? Here's your pressure bonding connector again. Let's talk about electrical bonding. It's very confusing to a lot of people, and it's very important in the pool industry. I know it's important in other industries too, but it's really important in the pool industry because there's voltage in the pool, and there's no way we can stop voltage from being in the pool. So having said that, the trick that we learned many years ago, thanks to some old German or Italian physicist, was that current is what hurts people, and current cannot flow between 2 points at the same voltage. So we know there's voltage in the pool, so let's make sure that anything that somebody comes in contact with around the pool, in the pool, or connected to the pool is at the same voltage. That way, even though they're standing on voltage, they don't get shocked. This is why a bird can stand on a live wire and not get burned, even though that's a bare wire, and there could be sometimes as much as 50,000 volts under them. But the voltage under each foot is the same. If you were to reach up and touch that bird with something as simple as a nail or a thumbtack, the bird would be toasted because the nail or the thumbtack would be at a different voltage. So with bonding, we eliminate shock hazards from stray currents, voltage gradients. When your neighbor or you shut off your air conditioner at night, the utility company doesn't know that. They have some good prediction algorithms, and they know when to slow down the current going down the street, but they don't know exactly when you turn off your electricity. So every power pole has a ground rod on it. So you turn off your air conditioner at night on a hot night, and all of a sudden that voltage, that current wants to go somewhere, so it goes down that ground rod into the earth and goes looking for something, because the earth is a conductor, but it's not a good conductor. So what does it look for? It looks for steel, and there's lots of it in the pool. Again, this electrician that I've told you about in Texas says if you have a pool and you're the only one in the neighborhood, you've got the ground for the whole neighborhood, because every time something goes off, all that goes to your pool, but nobody notices, and it's cool. So faulty equipment circuits can cause excess current to flow, and the current should just equalize throughout the whole system, and everybody's safe. So what do? We run a number 8 solid bare or coated wire from the pool steel using approved bonding clamps or irreversible butt splice connectors or isothermic welding. And we run that back, start at and bonding and grounding meet at the pool light screw. Remember I said that was really an important connection. We run that back to the equipment and connect it to anything that has electricity to it. That would include the pumps, the heaters, not the filters. They have no electricity, not yet. The control systems for salt chlorine generators that have been added by a pool service guy who doesn't understand bonding, by ozone systems and things, automation systems that have been added by people who can hook it up and get it to work, but don't understand the difference between grounding and bonding. And they see something is grounded. I can't tell you how many times I see a motor has changed on a pump and it's not bonded. And I know what's going on. The pool service guy that changed it, they don't have any license. They don't need a license. They change the motor and they say, yeah, what do I need this for? It's already grounded. There's clearly a green wire here. So I don't need to bond it, but they do. So on older installations, finding bonding violations is common. Now today, you have to actually bond the decking around the pool and you have to bond the water. Bond the water. Okay, now that's something that really confuses a lot of people. But what's happened is, and I mentioned this a few slides back, that the whole concept of pool lighting is changing. We're going to LED lights. There's LED lights that you can buy, and they're very popular, that just slip inside an 1.5-inch PVC pipe. There's no bonding at all. Now, remember we talked about that light can, and I said that that light can had to be metallic because it was part of the bonding system. I probably didn't say that, but that's the reason it had to be metallic as part of the bonding system. So in newer pools, that light can is gone. And there's that light can was bonding the water in the pool. So today, a pool built today after in the past year or two, no, probably in the past 4 or 5 years, they have to install a metallic fitting in the plumbing in the pool. I think it's about 6 inches long. It's made out of copper, and they run a bonding wire to it, and that bonds the water. Or you can buy skimmers that have 9 square inches of copper in them, and there's a bonding clamp on the back of the skimmer. And so those get installed in a lot of new pools. So now we have to bond the water. We also have to bond the deck. So if you don't put steel in the deck, you run a wire all the way around the pool and you connect it in 4 places and it sits under the deck or in the deck. In the deck is just fine. If you put steel in your decks, you have to connect the steel on the decks to the pool steel in 4 different places. Again, using a number 8 wire, approved bonding clamps to make the connection, or isothermal welding. So the world of bonding keeps changing. And we still see things like window clamps that are too close, windows that are too close to a pool, hose bibs that are too close to the pool that have to be bonded. See the examples here? And these get passed. Here's a door that has to be bonded. Probably the most common thing I see that needs to be bonded are post anchors for patio covers, because they go in again after inspection. So here are just some of the things that need to be bonded. At one time, this was everything, but the pumps, the heaters, pool cover motors, I see them not bonded quite a few times, especially if they're retrofitted. If you see a pool cover motor, if you see a pool cover sitting in a redwood box above the deck, that means it was added after the pool was finished, and that motor will not be bonded. I can almost guarantee it. A metal fence within 5 foot of the pool. Oops, I went too far. Metal fence within 5 foot of the pool. I inspected one in Carlsbad yesterday that they had put up a beautiful glass frame, a glass fence in a metal frame, and it was right next to the pool. It was within about 3 feet of the pool. And I told them they had to bond it, and they were freaked out. But then I showed them it's not that big a deal. And ladders that go into the pool, handrails that go into the pool, they all have to be bonded. Diving board stands, the metal parts, have to be bonded. And again, the junction boxes. The junction boxes are really good to remember, because let's say you find a motor that somebody's moved the equipment and there's just one pump and there's no bonding wire anywhere in sight. You can always go over to the junction box and connect to the junction box. A lot of the newer boxes have a clamp right underneath them for that purpose, and others you can throw a bonding clamp on the metal. Remember I told you about the metal, or you can weld a bonding clamp, isothermal welding, a bonding clamp onto the bottom of that brass junction box. And here's your slide stance. Now, sometimes the back of the stand does not have to be bonded because it's more than 5 feet away. Here are some bonding clamps. I'm sure you've seen them all. Now here we see a fellow who put in a patio cover, and see the bonding wire coming up out of the deck and anchored to the patio cover. Post. Now, what I tell people, the easiest thing to do is to just put a little wood sleeve. Make a decorative sleeve around there that hides the metal, so that you don't have to bond it. But if somebody had the forethought to do this, then that's fine. That's better. Here we see bonding wires twisted together. Sorry, you can't do that. You have to use approved bonding clamps. You can't use a wire nut. That's not an approved bonding clamp. This is a very low impedance connection. So here we have a bunch of posts within 5 feet of the pool that need to be bonded. And here is a famous one. Home inspectors used to do this. I don't think any home inspector does this anymore. But home inspector used to say, when I first got in the business, some home inspectors said, not you guys, I know it wasn't any of you that are listening to here, would say, oh, if it's not bonded, just put a grounding rod next to the pool equipment and hook a bonding clamp to that. And here's an example of somebody who thought that would work. If you stop and think about that, what you're doing here is you're assuming that the earth, the soil, makes a good electrical connection between this wire and the pool steel. The earth is not a very good conductor of electricity. It conducts, but it's not very good. So this is not a satisfactory solution. Hopefully none of you done that. Okay. See, we still haven't gotten out of safety items. How are we doing on time? Oh, well, I only blow an hour so far.
Some questions.
Okay.
Rick.
You want some questions, Neil?
Yeah, we have a list that would be worthwhile going through.
Okay.
One of the members said they recently read that latch heights was going to 60 inches. Is there any truth to that?
It's probably in discussion, but it has not happened yet. I haven't heard that myself, but we always hear discussions like that. And your local district, like the city of El Cajon or La Mesa or Healdsburg, could decide they want the latches 60 inches, and then that's what you have to follow, because they are allowed to increase the standard, and we're going to talk about that when we get into drains too. So
Yeah, more
but no, I have.
stringent. Right.
They can get more stringent. They just can't get looser. They can't.
Right.
They can't go and say, oh, they only have to be 48 inches. Yeah.
Oftentimes, I remember I did an inspection 10 years ago, and the house had a pool, and I was talking about the diving board and the depths and things like that. And the lady I was talking with said, well, speak no more. My husband's a paraplegic because he dove off a diving board and broke his neck. So I've been very cautious since then about diving boards. So what actually is the depth that requires, and how far out is that for diving boards?
Well, first of all, the standard depth was challenged in a lawsuit very similar to what you just described. The fellow named Sean Manili. The case was Manili versus NSPI, and you can download a synopsis of that case on my website. The depth that was in the standard was 7.5 feet. And the slope going up from the bottom part, I think it had to be a 5-foot flat area, and then a 1 and 3 slope going back to the break, and then at the break a 1 and 7 slope to the shallow end of the pool. But that standard no longer exists. The standard for the diving board depth comes from the manufacturer. I just had to design a pool in the city of Clyde, Kansas. I think they have a population of about 6, but they had this. they're going to build this huge pool. They must have found some federal money or something, and they wanted to put a high board and a low board. And I spent they said, well, here's some of the boards we'd like to have, and each one of those boards had a different depth requirement. So I had to come up with a depth requirement for them, and I explained to them when I did the final design that that this standard is not coming from me; it's coming from the board manufacturers, and you can't hold me liable for it. Because I said at first I said I don't want to design a pool with diving boards for you. So the standard comes from the manufacturer. Um, so you go, SR Smith is probably the biggest manufacturer, and they make a bunch of boards and a bunch of slides, and they're really a good company. But you would download the installation specifications for that board, and it will have the profile of the floor. They make a kit. You can become a certified diving board certifier. And I took that course. I actually have that certification, but I've never used it. They sell you a net, and this net has about 5 or 6 floats on it, and you put it under the board in the pool, and it floats it floats under the board at all these different points, and you measure the depth at each of those points, and that will tell you whether the board meets the pool meets the certification of the board. I do not have one of those nets. I have no intention of ever getting one of those nets. You guys are welcome to get one from SR Smith if you so choose. But it would probably take you an hour to certify the pool that's safe for diving, and then if something goes wrong, guess who they're going to call? So even today, as I told you, just a day or two ago, I told someone to take a board off a pool, and it was brand new, put on by Mission Pools, a very reputable company, probably one of the best in the county, and they would not certify that the pool was safe for diving. For the second owner, they wouldn't. Who knows what they did for the first owner, and I don't think the first owner's talking, but they would not certify it as safe for diving for the second owner. So
one of our members asked about a turbo cell. How do you know it's working? Are they good or bad?
by a turbo cell, do they mean a salt chlorine system or ozone
I don't
system?
know. All they utilized was the term turbo cell.
Well, yeah, there's ozone systems and there are ultra UV systems, which I think I'm going to talk about, but we probably won't get to it. And I go to manufacturers of ozone and UV systems at every trade show that I go to, and I ask them that very same question. How can I tell if your unit is working? I want a commercial pool, big commercial pool, and the systems that cost 10 grand or more, you know if they're working. They both contain a bulb, and the more expensive ones contain a bulb that creates what they call a corona discharge arc, and this creates ozone. Or they have a smaller one that uses ultraviolet light to correct geez, there's so many different things that could be called a turbo cell. I hope if he says I'm on the wrong track, say so. They use ultraviolet light to create ozone, and then there's ultraviolet systems that directly put ultraviolet onto the pool water, and they're all good supplemental systems, but you can't tell if they're working. So whenever I inspect one, I put in my report, change the bulb, because I know that's what you have to do every once in a while. And if the pool service guy calls me up and says, hey, I just changed it 2 months ago, then I say, well, then don't change it. And that ends that. But most of the times I never hear back. I never hear back because they just forget. People just forget to have them, and there's no light on there to say the bulb went out. Now on salt chlorine systems, there are lights on there that say whether the salt is low and whether the cell needs service. There are lights on those. On the Pentair system, they're on the cell itself, which is really stupid because you have to throw the whole system away every time you change the cell. And on the other systems, they're in a control panel that's mounted on the wall near the cell. I don't know what else a turbo cell could be. Um,
I did
I,
get a little feedback. They mentioned the manufacturer Hayward turbo cell.
well, Hayward. Well, I'm not sure what a Hayward
Okay.
turbo. What would be different? Uh, it's one of those terms that could be used for a lot of different things, but it sounds like some type of supplemental sanitization system.
Got
Um,
it.
if they shot me a picture of it, I'd know what it is right away.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Um, Another really good question is, do you actually test for the continuity of the bonding that you see? And how do you tell if it's actually connected to the pool grid or not?
Well, I can do that, and I have done that. Um, and the simplest way is using a flashlight. Um, I have a flashlight, and I run a wire um, from the back of the pump over to the like a handrail or the junction box, and because the junction box is always a good place to start. That brass plate should always be bonded. I run from the pump to the junction box, and if the light comes on, I know it's connected. Um, and it's pretty simple. It's just I if the system looks good to me, I usually don't test for continuity, but if I have the slightest suspicion that something is screwed up, especially if it looks like the equipment's been moved over the years, then I do pull out because it's a pain in the neck. I have a 100-foot wire spool that I keep in the trunk of my truck, which is not really a truck, and I have
Yeah,
to un.
I've seen your truck.
Yeah, it's um, well, when I sold my construction business, I swore I'd never drive another truck. I grew to hate them after having years of employees ruining them. Um, anyway, so I keep this 100-foot roll of wire and alligator clips, and I bought a wire from Amazon that actually has two wires coming out of the bottom with alligator clips, and if you touch the two alligator clips together, the light comes on. So if I connect the alligator clip to the pump and the alligator clip to the and the wire, because the wire coming out of the flashlight isn't that long, I have to band-aid across, touch it to the pump, and then if I get continuity, that's good enough. Now my buddy Bill Hamilton, who I've referenced several times about uh, electrical, says that I should use an ohm meter. Um, but I said, but Bill, if the light comes on, I know they're connected. He said, yeah, you're right. Go ahead, use the light. But he uses an ohm meter to test for resistance, so which should be 0. So
So one more question on bonding. What about stucco screed? You know, the weep screed, the metal weep screed?
that's come up before. Nobody's ever um, required that be bonded, but fortunately, most pools are usually 5 foot away from that anyway. But I've certainly had to bond frames for sliding glass doors, windows. I showed you pictures of that,
Hmm.
but I've never had to bond a weep screen, and that's probably one of those questions we're better off not knowing the answer to. So.
And last question, bromine mist. Does that actually inject bromine into the water?
A bromine mist.
Yeah.
Uh, I've heard of in Florida they have misting systems around pools all the time to keep the bugs away, but I've never heard of a bromine mist. But the answer to your question is a bromine system is really no different than a chlorine system.
Hmm.
In fact, your salt chlorine systems, you can put bromine in the pool and it'll do the job. It'll do exactly the same thing. Um, so bromine is an alternative to chlorine. It has its advantages in that it is less likely to dissipate in heat. And so that it's much more popular in spas than it is in pools because it's expensive. And it has some other disadvantages. Chlorine is fast, it's good, it does what it's supposed to do, but people misunderstand it. It's a really good product, but people misunderstand it. I keep doing that. Sorry about that. So, but
All right, Rick,
I've
go
heard
ahead.
of misting systems, but I never heard of one that does it with bromine. So,
Okay.
okay, okay,
Well, that
guys.
was the end of the questions, so
All right,
carry
I'll
on.
charge on. I'll charge on. Carry on. Let me know when you're really sick of me, because I can go all night, I think. Anyway, I don't know. So here are drains, and uh, I've said this to a lot of home inspectors: is how many of you home inspectors tell people to change their drains to anti-vortex covers? And usually there's quite a few hands go up in the room. And I don't know how many of your hands are going up right now. But if your hand is going up when you make people a recommendation to put an anti-vortex cover on a pool, take that language out of your vocabulary and never say anti-vortex again, because anti-vortex does not mean anti-entrapment, and an anti-vortex cover will only prevent vortexes at certain flow rates, and you have to know what the flow rate of that cover is in order for it to prevent vortexes. I have lots of anti-vortex drain covers that you can see the vortex right on top of them. So why are drains a big deal? There's four, sometimes some people say five, some people say four types of drain entrapment. There's probably one of the worst is called evisceration. And that's where if you Google the name Abigail Taylor, Abigail sat on a drain, broken drain on a public pool, and it pulled her intestines out through her anus, and she lost her life after a struggle of several months. And those several months were not good months for Abigail. Um, then there's limb entrapment, where somebody there's a broken drain cover and they stick their hand in there and get stuck. There's body entrapment, where they lay across the drain and the drain holds them down and they drown. And that happened to a young lady named Virginia Graham Baker, whose grandfather was the Secretary of State, James Baker. Um, he was out of office at the time, but he had a lot of pull. And then the most common type of entrapment is hair entrapment, where somebody with long hair gets too close to the drain. Their hair gets pulled into the drain, no matter which type of cover it is, and then the hair ties itself in knots in the drain cover, and they can't get it out, and so they can drown. So those are the types of entrapment that you can have. Here's a broken drain cover. Here is a person who got stuck on a cover like this. This is a person who got stuck on a drain cover. This is a lady that I worked for. Her name is Fowler, and she was suing the company who did this. It was one of the worst installations I've ever seen. Now, for those of you who still say anti-vortex, I want you to look at the pattern on Mrs. Fowler's back. And gee, doesn't that look like an anti-vortex drain? It sure does. And that's exactly what she was trapped on. So again, take that word out of your vocabulary. So today's drain standards, you have to have 2 balanced suction outlets with ASME approved covers or grates. I'm going to talk about those covers a lot here. Now, the word balanced is critical, which means when you see 2 drains on the floor of a pool or a spa, the flow has to go out equally from both of those drains, which means there has to be a pipe in between those 2 drains and a T connected to the fuel, so to the suction pipe right exactly in the middle. Very difficult to test for. A suction outlet consists of 3 things: a cover, a sump, and a fastening system. We're going to talk about the cover and the sump, but let's talk about the fastening system. If you buy if you install a drain cover and you take off the cover for some reason and you lose the screw and you put the cover back on with one screw, well, of course, right now it doesn't comply if you only has one screw. So you go down to Home Depot and buy a screw, it still doesn't comply. You have to go back to the manufacturer of that cover and buy the screw from them, because the fastening system was tested along with the cover. And if you take out that fastening system, which is just a little screw, you have invalidated the the standard. Okay. Multiple sets of pumps are permitted in 2 or more suction outlets as long as they are balanced. 3-foot separation between drains, or 1 on a vertical surface and 1 on a horizontal surface, or what we call different planes, so that somebody could not really possibly get stuck on both of them. Consult an expert for other options. I have a lot of other options. I'm not going to go into too many of them today. Local authorities can make stricter requirements. Now, the federal law says that the drains have to be separated by 3 feet on center. California has taken that law and said 3-foot edge to edge, 3-foot edge to edge, which means they have to be pretty far apart. The most common spa shape out there is a 7-foot round spa. So if we subtract 1.5 feet for the bench, that means the floor of that spa is 4 foot across. And the drains are about 10 inches. Drain covers are about 10 inches. So as you can see, 3 foot plus 20 inches doesn't make it in a 7-foot spa. You can't achieve the 3-foot separation edge to edge in a 7-foot spa, 7-foot round spa. And of course, in a smaller spa, and there's a lot of smaller spas out there, which I used to recommend, still recommend, but so the drains are not going to be compliant. I'll tell you, I don't know that I've ever inspected a compliant drain in California. This is a cover, and it's nationally tested. This is a particularly popular cover, and I'll explain the reason it's so popular. First of all, there is printed on the cover, or the manufacturer, and it all has to be on top of the cover. The manufacturer's name, it has to be printed on the cover how much flow rate it can handle. It might say 80 gallons a minute, 60 gallons a minute, 100 gallons a minute, 300 gallons a minute. It's going to say it. Some will say 100 gallons a minute on a floor and 80 gallons a minute on a wall. And again, because when they've been tested, it shows that will pass all the tests. They even have a test called the ponytail test, where they have a ponytail that they put in front of it when the drain's flowing full force. So, and a flow rate in gallons per minute has to be printed on there. The other thing that has to be printed on there is a lifespan. It will either be 5 years or 7 years. Somebody told me that there's some drain covers out there with a 10-year lifespan. I haven't seen one yet. So it's either 5 years or 7 years. So if you're inspecting a pool that has a drain cover that's more than 7 years old, it has to be replaced. Period. End of sentence. It's because the UV light attacks these things. They become a lot more easily destroyed. Somebody stomping on them, they can break. And then we have the situations that I just illustrated. So they have to have a date on them. They have to have a life on them. Sadly, they don't have on them what the installation date is. But in general, you can just tell your client that any drain cover that's 5 years old has to be changed. So here are some of the different styles of the new drains that are out there today. Now let's talk about sumps. You can either buy a drain with a pot that gets installed in the ground, and that pot and drain cover together as a pair are certified for a certain gallons per minute. It's really smart. It's really the smart way to do it. And nobody in California does it. In California, we do field-built sumps. So let's talk about what the sump is the hole under the drain cover. So here we have our drain cover, and here we have the pipe coming in either in the bottom, in the middle, or coming in from the side. From the top of the drain cover to where the pipe comes in, the depth has to be 1.5 pipe diameters. So if we have a 2-inch pipe, and mostly today we're seeing 2.5-inch pipes, but a 2-inch pipe, that distance would have to be 3 inches. And then the distance at the other side would only have to be 1 pipe diameter. So if we see a 3-inch suction, which a lot of builders are using, and I totally agree with that, it would literally have to be 3 plus 1.5, 4.5 inches down and 3 inches on the side. Or like this, as we see in illustration number D. A and B are the same. I don't know why I have both of them. So this is what the sumps are supposed to look like. Take a cover off and see what's underneath it. You will never see this. Here's what you'll see. Here is a drain cover in a spa. I drain the spa into the pool so I don't lose any water, so nobody gets mad at me. And here we have a 2-inch pipe and a 2.5-inch pipe. The pipes stick up and get plaster slathered around them, and they set the ring down and the cover right on top of them. Okay, so the covers were undersized anyway because you've got 2 pumps. When both of them are operating together, you're going to be pulling close to 200 gallons a minute, and this is a 95-gallon-a-minute drain cover. And they're not separated properly. You can see that they're separated by 30 inches center to center. They're supposed to be 3 foot edge to edge. Don't ask me where I got that rusty old ruler. I finally, after all these years, found one that's made out of plastic that doesn't rust, because I was replacing those every 6 months or so. But anyway, so the separation was wrong, the sumps were wrong, the covers were wrong. Aside from that, they were perfectly good. They didn't meet any known standard. Okay? And how do you fix this? I tell them to put the biggest, highest flow drain cover on there. I said, but I'm not going to tell you that in writing. In writing, I tell them fix it, which means jackhammer out the floor, separate the freaking things, and put the sumps in, or dig the holes deeper. Now, sometimes you'll see a pool that has 2 skimmers. We're going to talk about skimmers in a little bit. But when you see a pool with 2 skimmers, one of those skimmers will be connected to the floor drains. And by the way, the one thing you cannot do with a floor drain in a pool is drain the pool. So one of those will be connected to the floor drain. So this opening on the side of the wall under the front skimmer, under the second skimmer, is called an equalizer. I hate that name. I really, truly hate that name. It's because it's such a dumb thing. But anyway, it is no different at all from a drain. So either you get rid of this equalizer, or you put the proper safety covers, which means separated by 3 feet, with the proper sumps and the proper cover. Now, if you can't satisfy all the requirements, then you can put a gadget back at the equipment called a safety vacuum release switch. So as long as your drain covers are compliant and you put this gadget back at the equipment called a safety vacuum release switch, which everybody hates them because, again, they give you a lot of false alarms. But what they do is, if they detect a blockage, they open up and let air into the system, which then you have to go back and prime the system, but at least it protects the people. So these equalizer pipes, okay? And again, I'm going to talk about skimmers later, but I wanted to get that. That's the safety portion. I think I've covered in an hour and a half a lot of the safety concepts. So I'd like to move on to the construction concepts, unless Neil, you guys have any more questions on safety.
We have a really good question. It's directed to you from your experience. So we go out and we do find all the safety protection in place. Gates are self-closing and self-latching. And then 6, 7 months down the road, we get a call saying, "Oh, the safety mechanism failed, and who's responsible for that?" So how do you word in your report a way in which to be able to protect yourself?
I simply say I take a picture of the gates, usually partly opened because that's the way they are. And so that means they're not self-closing and self-latching. I take a picture of the gates and I say, these gates must self-close and self-latch. I don't say they do. I say they must, which essentially puts the responsibility on the person reading that report. I say the gates must self-close and self-latch. I don't say they do now, they're fine. I might say that verbally, but I don't say that. But even then, I don't say it verbally because very rarely that they do. Um, uh, but I say that it's your responsibility to make sure that they self-close and self-latch. Just word it correctly. And I've always said that the gates have to self-close and self-latch. You have to make sure of that, and you'll see that if you look at my sample reports. And by
Excellent.
the way, that has never happened to me. That has never
Got it.
happened to me. I think the only callback I've ever had in, well, I got sued once, but the lady was mad that I got sued because she sued a realtor and he drugged me into the lawsuit. And she said, "What are you doing here? She said, you've done nothing but help me." And I said, "Well, sorry, that's the way our legal system works." And I did get sued, but the only callback I ever had was a guy who was mad at me because the flagstone was flaking on his pool. So anyway, I'm going to start talking about some of the construction items. And I know we've got till 8 o'clock. Um, and I'm not going to get done. I'll be happy to come back another time and pick up where we left off, if the COVID thing is still going on, and if I'm available and still alive. I'm always happy to do this for you guys. Uh, if you make me come out to do it, you got to pay me, but I don't charge here. So coping is the cap on the top of the pool. Let's go back a few. Um, Coping is the cap that goes on top of the pool. It's supposed to completely cover the top of the pool. And the top part of the pool, which you'll often hear that they're supposed to be 12 inches thick. Not true, but you will hear that. The top of the pool is supposed to be covered with the coping, and then a piece of foam is installed between the pool deck and the pool and the coping, and then a mastic sealant goes on top of the foam, and then your deck is poured right up to that. That system protects the pool from the deck expanding and contracting. This is another one. I am the master of homemade tools. When people see me take that flashlight that I told you about, where's this guy coming from? If you ever saw the tool that I used to measure the depths of the pools, you'd laugh at me. But not many people do what I do, so I have a lot of crazy tools. But this is one of my favorite tools. I buy them at Home Depot. They're about $4. I put some tape around the end because it makes it a little easier on my hand. They don't get as hot. And then I take that rod and I walk around the pool, tapping on each coping stone, listening for hollow sounds. If I find a coping stone, whether it's flagstone, coping, or brick, then I bend over. If it sounds really hollow, a little bit of hollow is okay. I think if you ask our forensic tile guy, Don Halverson, that you're supposed to have like about 80% coverage under coping, 100% coverage under certain types of tile, but that's a whole different sorry. So I test it, and if it sounds really hollow, I'll see if it's loose. And sometimes I'll find some loose stones and I'll point them out. And the rod's really handy there because I can just use the rod to point to it and take a picture. All this done without bending over and hurting my ancient spinal column. Then it can be the result of hot mortar or incomplete coverage, or the stone could be just loose. So that's a good little trick to do. I used to do it with a little hammer, but boy, my back was sore by the time I got all the way around the pool. This way I just walked around the pool tapping. Here's standard safety grip coping. It was the only coping that you could buy for a pool when I first got in the business in the middle 70s. And it was quite a product. It was really a tedious product to install and to manufacture. And the sad part was that every big pool company like Anthony and Blue Haven, they made their own. And then there were a couple companies that made coping and sold them to the smaller pool companies. So if you see somebody that has safety grip coping and a piece of coping is missing, they're never going to find a piece of coping to match it. So look for cracks or chips, especially where the coping meets the decks. Coping may be impossible to replace. The molds have gone. It's just not a popular product. So here are the problems you can run into with coping. And this is what you're supposed to have. The coping is supposed to cover the pool wall completely, but oftentimes they don't, because if the pool wall really is 12 inches thick, the coping isn't really long enough to cover it. So you get a situation like this where the coping is only covering part of the pool, and they stick this expansion joint in, and it really doesn't protect the pool because the pool is touching the concrete. I take a 20 penny nail and a little hammer, and I drive a hammer down through the mastic, and I should be able to take that 20 penny nail, which is 5.5 inches long, and it should hit dirt. And if I hit something hard, I know that usually this is what I have, okay? But the other thing I can have is where they just poured concrete under the foam, or here's a situation where this is where the deck is under the foam, and I can't tell whether it's this or this, but I'm 90% sure that it's this. But here's a situation that also occurs where they built up the top of the pool with mortar. Now, if the pool wasn't perfectly level after gunite, and of course it never is, the person that puts the coping on has got to level the pool. Now, if the pool is more than a half inch out of level, which means plus or minus a half inch or 1 inch, they're supposed to pull off the job and have the builder, which was me in this case, go back and bring out the gunite crew and have them reshoot the top of the pool and get it closer to the tolerance. But none of them did that because it was just easy for them to, because it wasn't the whole pool that was out of level, just maybe 10 feet, 20 feet. They would just mix up some more mortar, lay it down there, and put the coping on and the tile on, and it looks great. And you don't know that they did that until maybe 2-3 years later, or maybe even never. And so then when the concrete expands, it pushes against the coping, and the mortar is very soft, so we get cracks in the tile, and the tile and coping actually can slide forward. So flagstone coping came along in the 70s, and when we first put it on, they didn't put an expansion joint on because it was so thin, they felt that they didn't need it. But we learned from experience that that wasn't the concern. Some flagstones contain metal, and you'll see rust on them, and so some people might freak out about that, but you tell them, hey, that's just part of the charm. And some are concerned about the rough edges. They can be ground, but most stone coping is probably the most popular that we're seeing today. It's not the yellow or buckskin Arizona flagstone or the salmon colored flagstone that we had. We're seeing a lot of heavier granite type flagstones, but some flagstones really flake. Cameron flagstone and a few others, they are constantly shedding. And some people like that look. And some people really hate it. So whenever I see flagstone coping, I put a little note in my report that says, if you're unhappy with the flaking, call a stone expert. uh, and I don't care. I don't care if that stone is solid granite. I put that in there. Okay, bullnose brick came along in the 1980s, and it became the coping du jour. Everybody put it in. But bullnose brick, from the edge of the bullnose to the back of the brick, was only 10.5 to 11 inches long. So again, if the pool was 12 inches, it didn't cover the top of the pool. So we would start to see some of the problems that I talked to you about with safety grip coping. Um, it's really good. It's really secure. People really love the look. They felt that it was a lot safer than standard brick, because standard brick was used a lot. I had standard brick on my own pool. Um, Another little trick that happened is a lot of this bullnose brick was cored. It had holes in it, and that actually gave it strength. The same principle as an I-beam or something like that. Um, but then what they would do when they got to the skimmer, let's talk about, see if we have a picture of that. And here's one. This bullnose brick is designed to replace safety grip coping. So they could change the coping on the pool without having to change the deck, which was, that became a big seller. Okay. Here is standard 8 and 12-inch brick, and again, we run into the same issues. They don't cover the bond beam. They're softer. They're going to deteriorate. They're going to have sharper corners. And the first year that they're on the pool, you'll generally see efflorescence coming through them, but the efflorescence goes away after a while. Beach entries. Beach entries are incredibly popular right now. We hear about them. We see them on a lot of pools. And a beach entry, the maximum slope of a beach entry is 1 in 7. So if you want a beach entry to go all the way down from 0 to 3.5 feet, it's going to take up 21 to 25 feet. And nobody wants to do that, but they like the idea of a beach entry. So what the beach entry does is it goes down to the first step, and then it transitions, and there's 2 more steps or 3 more steps after the beach entry. I don't think I've ever seen on a residential pool a beach entry that goes all the way down to the floor. So we check the slope. Oftentimes they're too steep. Now, some of the things, and again, these are standards, not codes. Here they're using a contrasting material on the beach entry, which is really good because we don't want people coming to the end of the beach entry and not knowing that the beach entry ends, because kids, they might think it goes all the way down to the floor, so they go running down this beach entry, and all of a sudden they tumble into the pool and get a surprise. But again, the slope is 1 in 7, and that translates to about 8 degrees, by the way. So you get one of these cute little apps on your phone. It shows that the beach entry is 13 degrees, and you can put that in your report. And they just about all violate that. Now, some other things about the beach entry is there's supposed to be a contrast here. So if you don't use a contrasting material on the beach entry, you're supposed to use a contrasting band. There should be some method of circulating water on the beach entry. And here they did the pebble finish, which is deteriorating. There should be a barrier on both sides of the beach entry. Again, these are all written up as part of recommendations in our builder's manuals. They're not codes, but the purpose of the barrier, again, is we want people to walk in on the beach entry. We don't want them stepping off the side, because they don't know what the depth is. They don't know what the depth is going to be here. They don't know what the depth is going to be there. So that's what we recommend. No plaster or pebble finishes on these beach entries. You can put plaster up to a certain point. That's always going to be flooded up to the level of the tile, but after that, you have to put something else. Now, years ago, we did a lot of this cantilever decking where we pour the coping out, pour the cantilever deck out right over the edge of the pool. If you go to Arizona, parts of Las Vegas, New Mexico, that's all you see. The decking goes right out over the edge of the pool. It's very popular, and those guys know how to do it, and they know how to do it right. California, they've never really learned how to do it right. So let's take a look. Now, I want you to take a look at the coping on this pool. And you say, well, wait a minute, you were talking about decking. Why are you showing me pictures of coping? The reason is there is no coping on this pool. This is cantilever decking. The crack follows the entire perimeter of the pool almost perfectly. Look at it going around following the pool. Okay. So this was at one point in time one homogeneous, one piece deck going all the way across the pool, but it settled because the pool did not settle and the deck settled, and we got a crack following the pool. So that tells me the decking person really didn't know what they were doing when they installed it. And that is the rule rather than the exception in California. I used to think California builders were so great until I started traveling around the country. And trust me, guys, I've testified as an expert in 10 states. I've taught pool construction on the East Coast at least 10 times. I've taught pool construction in the South, Texas, Kansas, places like that. And some practices are very different. And some of the things they do in other parts of the country are much better than the way we do them here, the way I was taught to do them when I first got in the business. The correct installation, we have a deck subgrade, carefully graded with no variations, compacted. We have a leveling course on top of the pool to get it perfectly level. Now, in Arizona and Texas, they put the tile on first. If you ask a California builder, do you ever put the tile on first? He or she will tell you why that's impossible. You can't do it. And if you ask an Arizona builder, do you ever put the coping on first? They will say, why that's impossible. You can't do it. So practices do vary. And so here we pour across there, and it's really a good idea to have a bond breaker on top of this, and then a bead to seal. We don't want the tile. Go ahead.
You're still there. Okay. It was
Yeah,
just wanted
yeah,
to make sure. Okay.
yeah. I muted myself because I had to cough. Sorry. Okay, I'm still here. The tile should never touch the decking. There's another system that's better than this, but that's what we see. Now here we have a bond beam that's not leveled, okay? And the waterline tile cracks. Here we have a shear crack going across the pool. So you're going to see these things, and they look very serious. They're not really bad structural cracks. No bond breaker, we can get shear cracks. So it can get pretty messy. And so here's one where we see the cantilever deck has moved and pushed the tile off the pool. Okay. Here we see the crack that goes around the pool. Here we see again cracks that follow the outline of the pool. And here you see the coping did not cover the top of the pool. The top of the pool was out here, and so that's where the crack is. And here we see some other lovely cantilever. And the sad part is, people that are watching this, is that these pools looked so good when they were first finished. They really looked great. But now they don't. We see the joints open and the tile getting popped off. And I'm going through these quickly. Here's a way they do it in other parts of the world, where they put the form on, they put the tile on first, they attach a form to the tile, they put this plastic bead on top of the tile, and then it can anchor, but they still put down the bond breaker, okay? But that can still have problems, because here you can see that plastic bead, and this is a pool where they had serious problems. Even though they used the right method, they still didn't do it. It's still screwed up. And this is a public pool, a huge public pool up in Sacramento area at Natomas National Park, Natomas Park it's called. So what you see today in California is they'll usually do cantilever twice. They'll pour the first pour and then come back a couple of days later, put the expansion joint in to the second pour. So that solves the problem at a tremendous increase in expense, but it's a lot less problematic. Vinyl liner pools will also get coping. Vinyl liner pools oftentimes have a frame, and this is what's called a deck support. And so they can put the coping right on top of there, and they put rebar across these deck supports, and they fill under these deck supports, but they don't necessarily compact, but they usually fill with sand or gravel, and then they can pour their concrete and not have to worry about movement. I used to hate vinyl because I thought vinyls were cheap and cheesy, but when I started traveling and I got back east and I saw some of the most spectacular pools in the world, and I found out they were vinyl. These are vinyl pools, okay? And they have coping on them, right? They don't look too shabby. Fiberglass pools can also get coping. They have 3 ways of doing it. A fiberglass pool will, and these are fiberglass pools that are dropped in. They're craned over the house and dropped in, and they all get this anchor going around them. This little anchor that you see going down below the lip to add support. Essentially, they're creating a bond beam so they can either level it off with the pool, or they can hang it over the pool with a cantilever, or they can put coping, brick coping on top. Tile is optional on fiberglass pools. And here you see a fiberglass pool. This is one of the most difficult pools to set because they have to backfill under this opening between the pool and the spa. But when it gets in the ground, they're pretty nice looking pools. This is a pool I worked on in New York on Long Island, an indoor pool. It's a 1 million gallon pool. And it's an absolutely gorgeous pool. And they were losing 1,000 gallons a day, which on a 1 million gallon pool isn't that big a deal. But since the walls were actually built out of CMU's concrete masonry units, you could see the efflorescence on the other side of the walls. And so, and this was an older pool that was rehabbed. So they wanted to find the leaks. And I had a diver, we would come in here at 4 in the morning, and I had a diver in this pool, actually 2 or 3 divers, looking for the leak every morning from 4 a.m. till 9 a.m. When the pool opens. And then people came in and we had to stop our leak detection. And we never found them. This is a vinyl liner pool. And it's a beautiful liner system. They actually roll it out and seam weld it together. And they ended up putting a new liner in, but if this pool had been in the ground, they never would have noticed that 1,000 gallons a day on a 1 million gallon pool. Older tiles are hard to find. They can be porcelain, clinker, glass mosaic. Glass tile is almost always problematic, and that's very popular now. Inspect the grout joint above the tile. Chipping of the tile indicates some problems. Silicone is popular as your top grout joint. That's a good idea no matter what kind of coping you have, to use silicone as your top grout joint. But again, it's not a cope. Now, we raise the bond beam on a lot of pools. We raise the back of the pool, and if you haven't figured out by now, the top part of the pool that's somewhere between 10 and 12 inches thick, and by the way, it can be as small as 8 inches. The top of the pool is called the bond beam, and we raise it to make interesting effects, to help deal with elevation and that sort of thing. And sometimes we shoot the wall right past the pool and make it look, tie it in with the pool. And it looks really good, again, when it's first built, but then over time, the soil moves under that wall and you get the cracking. And here's another example. It's a little bit more dramatic. I saw that on a vanishing edge pool just the other day. The grout can go bad. Because I have a lot of pictures on tile, so I'm going through them quickly. You see them popping off here, cracking. Here we have a pool, a spa that's raised, and we have some efflorescence coming through the outside. I'm working on a lawsuit where this is an issue right now. Here we have a cantilever deck and tile movement. Could have predicted that. Here we have tile popping off the spa wall. Now, this is interesting. This is a 6-inch spa wall, single drain like that. 6-inch spa walls were the rule rather than the exception when I first got in the business. Today, the 12-inch spa wall is probably almost the rule. You don't see any 6-inch. Well, the problem with 6-inch spa walls is that sometimes the steel vibrated when they were shooting the wall, and that left voids around the steel. Now, people always ask you, why doesn't the steel rust inside the pool? Because we know that water goes through the pool walls. If it doesn't go through from one side, it goes through the other. And the reason is because the steel is completely encapsulated in cement, which has a high alkalinity, plus it robs the steel of the oxygen that's needed to rust. So we don't get the rust in pool walls. Well, we do, but we usually because somebody screwed up along the way. So these 6-inch walls had a tendency not only to rust, but they had a tendency to move. And so we saw a lot of problems on those walls. And see missing tile all over the place. This tile is VS 806. Put thousands of square feet of it on. You can never buy it today. People were surprised when I recognized the tile. And here we have erosion under the skimmer bridge. They built a bridge up so they could get the bricks across the tile. But here's the tile just bulging out. Efflorescence, big problem. What happened here, I can tell you right now, is that the spa wall, they were shooting the spa wall and they had a collapse. And so this part of the wall was just fine, but this part of the wall, they just took the gunite off the floor and they tamped it on by hand and packed it down and got it looking real good. And the tile guy came in, put tile on it, but from here to here, it's just mortar and the water just goes right through it. And that's where you're getting all that efflorescence from. So. Here we see a bad attempt at repairing tile. Rust. Rust is something you want to fix, okay? That wall has to come out. And that's exactly what I was telling you about. See, it's a 6-inch wall. That wall's got to come out. You're not going to fix that. And calcium has to be ground off, or there are chemicals that will help with calcium, but they don't eliminate it. This is a major problem with vanishing edge pools. I've got the whole vanishing edge pools at the end of this presentation, but we probably won't get to it. Glass block. In the early 90s, we were putting glass block on pools, almost every pool. We put something like this on the spa wall. And as you can see, it's only about 6 to 8 inches, but at nighttime when they turned on the spa light, it really looked cool. The problem was that these things had a very high failure rate. So here we see a glass block wall with tile on top. Nice job. I mean, the guys worked hard. They did the job, but the material just wasn't the right product for the pool industry. So you might see some, and if you see some today, you can guarantee that it's at least 25 years old, maybe more. And if it's still working, don't worry about it. But this is where you got into trouble, where you built them 3 blocks high. Here's an 18-inch wall, and We tried putting steel between these blocks, but they rusted like crazy. They gave us a little ladder-like stainless steel type thing that we could use to reinforce between the blocks, but this one held up, others didn't. I went out on a job, and it was so funny. I drained the spa down to inspect the drains. I do that quite often, and the seller came out. And she said to me, and she said, "Oh, how you doing?" She's asking me questions about my inspections, and I said, "When did they replace the glass block?" And she said, "How did you know we had glass block on the floor?" And I said, "Because I could tell that there was once 18 inches of glass block, and they couldn't make it work. They tore it out, and they built it up and put tile on it. And now you've got this wall." And not only did they have to tear it out and build this wall at their expense, they had to refund you the extra money they charged for the glass block. And I said, that knowledge cost me a lot of money. And here we have another one, glass block replaced. So glass tile, how am I doing time-wise here? Oh, it's 8 o'clock.
Yeah, it's probably worth wrapping up.
Yeah. Um, Let me just show you. This pool is glass tile. The whole pool is 70 feet long, 70 feet in each direction, 10 feet deep, windows going into the house, all glass spa. Every square inch of this pool is glass tile. Every square inch of it had to be replaced because of bad insulation. And the material, this is a picture of the pool. See the windows. Every the material alone was $300,000 to fix it. So stay away from glass tile. It's popular on luxury pools. So I'll wrap it up here. Sorry we didn't get farther, but as I said before, I'm happy to come back again and finish things up for you sometime, as long as this COVID thing seems to last. But most of you guys are probably staying busy. I'm staying busy. I have to go to Los Angeles tomorrow to look at 2 pools. So, and I've already inspected 3 this week. So, and I took today off because it's my grandson's birthday. But that's about it. Okay, questions?
Yeah, we do have a couple. Um,
Okay.
what about the joints between coping? We see those deteriorated. It seems like those joints are over the bond beam. So how do you approach that when you see the joints between the coping?
It's just grout, and they can chisel it out. I regrouted my whole pool because I had 12-inch brick, and it was easy. It's very soft material, um, so it's just grout. It's really easy to fix, and but I'll bet you I say regrout the coping on probably half the pools that I inspect that have coping. Um, so just it's just grout. A good pool service guy or a pool tile guy would know how to do that. And that's one thing to remember, that the pool industry right now is booming. We had a lot of bad years, so a lot of people got out of the business. They moved on. They're selling insurance or whatever they're doing. Um, so we have a big labor shortage, and the business is booming. And the COVID thing has actually made it boom more because I guess people are staying home saying, "Hey, we can't go out back and do anything." So, so getting good people is really a challenge. And I caution my customer, if you call somebody and say, "I need you to come out and regrout my tile," if they say, "I'll be out tomorrow," well, don't hire that person, because the people that are good, you're not going to get them for a month. Uh, but fortunately, none of that is critical. Um, and unless the brick is loose, and that's the benefit of having my expensive custom-made tapping rod that I use to tap on the coping. So,
Yeah, I use a 3 foot or 4 foot dowel, a wood dowel, thick
oh,
one.
but the metal ones sound so much cooler.
It's-
And the other thing is Neil, I lose them 3 times a year, and
yeah.
people call me up and say, "Hey, you want to come back and pick that up?" And I say, "It's not worth the price of the gas. I'll just stop at Home Depot and get another one before I go home." So, um, yeah. So,
And
but
the plumbing for vinyl and fiberglass, it seems different the way things are laid out, and you've got that backfill and all that. So how do they do the plumbing for vinyl and fiberglass?
Well, it's no different,
Okay,
really, except that most of the vinyl people have started to say, or fiberglass people have started to say, don't put drains in, because they get a lot of cracks over the drains in fiberglass pools. And by the way, you can build pools with no drains. I design them that way all the time, but I don't want to get sidetracked on that. Uh, but what they do is they plumb through those walls that I showed you, the framework that I showed you, and
right.
some of them build their own walls, and some buy framework from a company. They drill through them and put them in there, and then they hang the liner and they start filling the pool. And when they get up to the inlets for the water circulation, then they cut a hole around the inlet as the water gets up to it, and they put a sealant around there. Um, but um, our standards only require one return inlet for every 300 square feet. Gunite builders traditionally always put at least three return inlets in. Um, and trust me, our pools are not 900 square feet. So they don't put as many return inlets in a lot of the inexpensive vinyl pools. Um, the higher end vinyl pools, they do everything pretty much just the same way we do. Their their skimmers are very different because the skimmers are designed to to uh, to go with have vinyl around them, and then they have a plate that goes on top of the vinyl that secures the vinyl to the skimmer. So a vinyl skimmer, you wouldn't put a gunite skimmer in a vinyl pool, but the return inlets are pretty much the same. They have their special fittings, and all the connections are done. They're all pre-plumbed, but the connections are done as the pool is filling. And as the pool is filling, they put a special vacuum behind the liner to suck out the air. So as the pool is filling, they're sucking the air out from behind the liner, they're cutting those holes, and then they're installing them in the liner track. The last thing that happens is for them to get installed in the liner track. Um, they and But these guys, I'd have to go through a whole different slideshow. There's some real artistry involved in installing vinyl pools, um, and fiberglass pools are very popular in the north, like in Montana, places like that, because you can't get a gunite crew to come up. You're going to call somebody in Washington and have them come out to the middle of Montana and gunite a pool. So fiberglass pools are very popular in areas like that. And I've trained for the Certified Building Professional program quite a few fiberglass builders, and I have learned so much from those guys. Um, they are really, really professional, and they know what they're doing, and they can install your pool in a week. But sadly, we we are so blessed or cursed here in that we have a lot of gunite subs, plaster subs. So if I wanted to start building pools tomorrow, I could just line up the subs by the end of the day. Um, and so it wouldn't be worth my while to try to get into vinyl or fiberglass, but it's a shame because they really are a nice option. But anyway, sorry to take so long. What next?
Well, that was the last that we're going to go through. Rick, thank you so much. You're such a treasure, and I mean that.
Thank
You
you.
should see my notes, and I've been around pools for a long time, and but things get upgraded and things get changed, and we really need to be on top of that. So very much appreciated, and we will take advantage of you and try to get you back and maybe concentrate on some a little bit more esoteric stuff or something like
Yeah,
that.
we could just go, actually, we could start right here at glass tile. That's a great place to start. Then
Yeah.
we could we could go through the vanishing edges and the perimeter overflows and that sort of thing. So,
Well, again,
okay.
thank you so much. And wow, we had a wonderful attendance today. Just fantastic. And
How
that's
many do
you,
we have?
members. It was in the 90s, so
Wow.
really, really nice. And I
Okay.
think we're at 77, so that they stuck it out. We had some audio problems from several members, and we'll try to address that. Just wanted you to know.
Well,
And
just remember, guys, that they're not allowed to quote me
right, yeah.
because remember, I got in trouble once for that.
So,
So
you members out there, if I didn't get to your question, please get it on the tie, and we'll try to address it up there. And thank you all out there for sticking it out. And please, please, please be COVID safe. It just takes one incident, and boy, it could really end your career. So please be very careful out there, and try to do vacant homes. That's what I like. Well, we're going to shut it all down. And remember, next Thursday, we have another Thursday night with CREIA. So connect up and we'll be here for you. Thank you all.
all right, bye, guys.